And Rofhiwa Madzena joins me in studio to give us the very latest business news. Rofhiwa, and you're going to be digging into those high unemployment numbers.
That's right, Sally. Unemployment numbers that were very disappointing indeed, because the country's unemployment rate has now reached a 13-year high for the first quarter in 2021, rising to 32.6%. That's from 32.5% in the fourth quarter of last year. Now, this means that more than 7.2 million people are officially unemployed. This worsening jobless rate was expected as the economy is still reeling from the effects of COVID-19. Stats says most jobs were lost in the informal sector, private households and agriculture, while the formal sector employment increased by 79,000. The number of discouraged work seekers increased to 6.9%. Dr Nthabiseng Moleko, development economist at Stellenbosch Business School, joins me now to unpack some of those figures that came out today. Doctor, many thanks for your time this evening. So this is a reflection of the immense population growth not being in line with GDP growth, which has been dismal despite slight improvements after the hard lockdown during the pandemic.
I think for me, it's market failure, to be specific. We have a problem with structural unemployment in South Africa. The labour market is unable to absorb those who actually provide skills to the labour market, and the demand for labour is really not speaking to whether the qualifications obtained and some of the key issues of making sure that we absorb those who come into the labour market every single year. In fact, the composition of the labour demand is not speaking to the myriad needs and supply of labour currently. So that is why we're sitting with over, in 1 year alone, a decrease of 1.4 million people actually employed. And that is a crisis in any country. And I think it's a continuum in that we continue to bleed jobs. COVID simply worsened the plight of the average South African. But I think to say that it's simply an issue of maybe population growth would be to minimize the exacerbation of the actual problem in South Africa. It's a critical problem, and we've been unable to break the failed labour market legacy of apartheid, but also we simply cannot absorb those who come into the formal sector from the informal, and particularly the rural and urban areas and the homelands and the former homelands. You'll find that some of the labour constructs remain from what they were in the 70s and 80s.
And why are we not able to change that? You're telling me that there are labour constructs that are still in place from the 70s and 80s, and we have this huge crisis, which we can all see given the data that's coming out. How is it that we are not able to begin to move forward, even in the slightest bit?
Number one, South Africa has a skills bias. So we basically see what we call a low employment coefficient in South Africa. We demand high skilled labor. There's a very low demand for low skilled labor. What are the kind of skills South Africa is producing? Is low skilled or semi-skilled labor. So our labor market has a very low absorptive capacity, particularly for those low skills. Secondly, the sectors that absorb these low skills are contracting. So you'll find that agriculture as a proportion of GDP, manufacturing, and particularly mining, not just in the last year, Rofhiwa, but over the last decade, we've looked at some numbers and seen that contribution of mining has dwindled from 518,000 to almost 456,000 over the 10-year cycle. In agriculture, you see the same construct of decline in labor absorption and labor contribution. So the key labor absorptive sectors that are in our economy are contracting, but also their ability to absorb laborers is actually on the downward trajectory. Why is that? It's primarily because of the I'd say the capital, the labor growth path that South Africa has absorbed. We've been unable to see a labor absorptive growth path. We've been unable to improve labor productivity, primarily because we are not moving towards high productivity sectors and growing those. That would mean our labor employment coefficient would go up, i.e. subsectors like manufacturing or agriculture, which absorb higher numbers of people, and particularly those in the rural population would see higher labor absorptive capacity. This has not happened. Instead, we see a capital-intensive growth path and largely towards the services side. And so the structure of South Africa's economy is not able to deal with poverty alleviation and also unable to absorb the majority of its own people.
So many elements to discuss there, Doctor. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and that is Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, who's the development economist at Stellenbosch Business School, giving us insight into how we cannot be able to grow the labour market in South Africa at the moment.